In this video, we're going to take a detailed look at the master section. But before we do that, I need to load a decent sound to help me demonstrate the parameters in our master section. And I'm going to use a violin sound from the FM7 Legacy bank. So we can find that together if we click FM7 Legacy, bowed strings, violin, and there it is. That's the sound I'm looking for, violins. So double click to load that. Brilliant. So over here on the navigator, let's click master. So what have we got? Well, first of all, we've got an output volume. That's fairly straightforward. Any parameter can be reset by double clicking it. So you double click volume, it'll go back to 80. We've got an input volume over here. This is not really for synth patches. This is if we want to use the effects in FM8 to process an external signal. So don't worry about that for now. We'll talk about that in a future video. Over here, we've got our polyphony settings. That's how many voices the synth will allow us to have. 64 is as high as it goes. And there's a mono button down here that we can press just to put it on monophonic mode. If we click that, it won't let us play any chords. To the right of polyphony, we've got this unison section. That is to add more voices to thicken up and make the sound richer. At the moment, you'll see it's set to 2, but this could be set anywhere between 1 and 64. Any parameter can be double-clicked and you can just type the value you want. The first important thing to point out is that if you're adding another 9 or so voices to your synth, it does just make the volume a lot louder. So when you're putting the voices up on unison mode, it's a good idea to back the volume off a bit. But you hear how much thicker that sounds than just one voice. There's a detune slider here. This is rather like a chorus effect. When it's on naught, we've still got a thick sound, but it's not so obvious that there are so many voices. If we turn the detune mode up, it's kind of like a chorus effect. And we could push that to extremes, to the point where it stops sounding pleasant and starts to sound quite horrible. It goes really detuned. There's a pan slider that will widen the stereo image by panning our voices more and more extremely the further the slider goes up. If you're listening on headphones or if you've got decent stereo separation with your speakers, you should be able to hear a massive difference there between that and that. Much wider sound. You might be wondering what this dynamic button does. If I disable that, basically, if our polyphony is set to lower than the number of voices, then playing more than one note, we're potentially going to run into trouble. If I try and play a chord, I'm holding down at least 3 notes on my keyboard there, but you can only hear 1. That's because it wants to play 10 voices for each note, but it can't even play more than 5 voices because that's the highest our polyphony is set to. If I turn on dynamic mode, it'll have the consequence that rather than notes simply disappearing, they will become thinner, so we can still get all the notes in our chord, they'll just have fewer voices. Ultimately though, the easiest solution in my opinion is just to have your polyphony set as high as it will go. If you've got your polyphony set as high as it will go, then you don't really need to worry about notes dropping out or notes thinning out, even when you're using unison, because you know that the polyphony is set high enough to handle it. Down here on the bottom left, we've got our master tuning section. This slider here can fine-tune the pitch of FM8 by as much as a semitone either way. You're unlikely to ever need or want that unless you're planning on tuning it to something that's kind of outside of the Western chromatic scale. This transpose control here allows us to change the pitch by increments of a semitone. It'll go 24 either way. So, perhaps if you were working on a bass patch, you might want to put that down to -12. That's an octave lower. Again, any parameter with numbers, remember you can just double click and type the value in that you want. Now underneath that we've got pitch bend mode. Now I reckon most of the time you're going to want that on normal. Pretty straightforward, you move your pitch bend wheel, the pitch of your synth changes. But some of the alternative modes can be handy from time to time. If you've got lowest, that means that when you move the pitch bend wheel while you're playing a chord, only the lowest note will change in pitch. Or you've got highest mode, same principle, but it's the highest note rather than the lowest one. You've got key on mode, which basically means that the pitch bend wheel is only effective while you're holding down a note. And you've got latest mode, which means that the pitch bend wheel only affects the last note you played. So if I do this, so last note in a sequence, that's what the pitch bend wheel will affect. But most of the time, you're going to want this on normal mode. We've got a portamento control here. If I turn this on, it'll glide between two notes. It's most likely that you're going to be using that on monophonic synths, so I'm going to put this on mono mode for now. If this auto button is turned off, then it will literally glide between any two notes that are played. But with auto mode turned on, it will only glide between two legato notes, i.e. if I'm holding down a note and I release that note before I hit another one, it won't glide. So I can do this, or I can do this. And of course, we've got our time control here, so we can have a much tighter glide. Or we can go really extreme. It's like a pan riser. Having a long portamento time and turning auto mode off is quite good for kind of Dutch style leads. And don't forget, double click any parameter, goes back to normal. Let's turn that off for the time being. To the right of that, we've got a few global controls for our arpeggiator. We can turn it on, and that does exactly the same thing as that button up there. We can change the BPM. And we can change the step size. Key sync mode means that it restarts every time you hit a key. As you can imagine, there's a lot more in-depth controls for the arpeggiator in the arpeggiator section, and we're going to explore that in great detail in another video. Back to the master section, I'm just going to turn that off for now. And to the right of that, we've got our quality panel. This is for kind of artificially degrading the quality of the sound. For that, we've got an analog slider, and what that does is kind of introduce a bit of a randomness into the pitch. If I demonstrate that. It's fairly subtle, but it can just make the sound a little bit more interesting. I mean, basically, as you may know, with old analog synthesizers, when the circuit boards would heat up, that would affect the pitch of the sound. So the longer you had your synthesizer turned on for, the more the pitch would be kind of variable. And basically, this is a kind of simple way of replicating that. We've also got digital. This is a bit more extreme. What this does is it kind of forces aliasing in the sound and gives it a kind of digital distortion. It's almost a bit like a bit crusher effect. And it sounds like this. It's quite a sort of harsh, cold, digital, brittle sound, and it gives it a nice kind of high frequency overtone, which can be quite good in certain situations. Finally, what we've got over here on the far right is a list of MIDI controller assignments. So if I wanted to use the MIDI Learn button to make a few assignments, I click the MIDI Learn button, click Analog, and let's twiddle a knob on my keyboard. Click Digital, twiddle another knob. And remember, if you've got switch off after assign disabled, like we did in video 2, you need to disable that manually. So now we've made those MIDI assignments, you'll see that they've appeared on the list here. Digital quality, controller 71, analog quality, controller 74. And if you want to get rid of them, you can just right click and say remove, or indeed you can just reset the list. And you can save MIDI assignments and load them again if you want to. So there you have it. We've looked at all the parameters on the master page, many of which are going to come in really handy when we start building our own patches from the ground up on the expert page. We're going to continue our progression through the various pages of FM8. In the next video, we're going to look at the effects page and all the different effects we can use to process our synth. So stick around.